Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook, or press down its tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in its nose, or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it make many supplications to you? Will it speak soft words to you? Will it make a covenant with you, to be taken as your servant forever? Thus speaks the Lord God himself in one of the Bible's strangest and most striking monologues. And it is within this ancient symbolic context that Final Fantasy XV's depiction of a successful covenant with Leviathan exists. Which raises the question, can the game's fantastic representation of this cryptic biblical concept help us uncover its full significance? The best place to begin, ironically, is the place where Final Fantasy XV itself is most cryptic. Juxtaposing two individually mysterious depictions allows each to shed a unique light on the other. It's easy to overlook the utter strangeness of Leviathan's in-game characterization. She is one of the 6 astrals meant to protect the world of Eos. She is not presented as fallen the way Ifrit is, and yet she refuses to be bound even by divine revelation. Leviathan, as the Bible puts it, surveys everything that is lofty. It is king over all that are proud. A spirit of fluidity, she seeks to liquidate all, considering even humanity insignificant prey. The feeding shall begin, and it shall not end until every last speck is devoured. Her acquisitive cast of mind reduces the world to a sea of interchangeable resources, an existential flood in which intrinsic meaning and purpose inexorably dissolves. She holds even the king and oracle she is destined to serve in contempt, spurning Luna's appeal to divine prophecy as an act of inexcusable sacrilege. When it raises itself up, the gods are afraid. At the crashing, they are beside themselves. Leviathan defies Titan and attempts to devour Bahamut's chosen. She claims the title of goddess, but she is no divine benefactor worshipped for the grace she sheds. Rather, she demands obedience to her own arbitrary whim. She is a fatalistic pagan deity, a twisting serpent, the dragon that is in the sea. Moreover, there is little distinction to be made between the dragon and the sea it calls home. Leviathan is the sea incarnate, certainly, and her proud waves can be stopped by nothing short of divine intervention. She's the all-consuming flood, the waves of death, the insatiably hungry belly of Sheol, and she's a vicious rival of Luna, the virgin bride who, like her celestial namesake, reflects the light of the divine. What, then, is Leviathan? She's an extraordinarily feral icon of Eros. Simultaneously carnal and carnivorous, she is that abyssal desire whose predatory appetite for all creation ends in dissipation, a wild hunger which, finding no material satisfaction, becomes the very maw of death. To forge a covenant with her is a fool's errand, and yet that is exactly what Noctis is called to do. Altissia, a city whose very name means Most High, was set to host not one, but 2 distinct covenants involving the king and the oracle. The first, of course, is the covenant with Leviathan. The second is the covenant of matrimony. So what is a covenant? In its biblical context, it is a formal, permanent relationship, bounded in blood and sacrificial division. Directed to the pursuit of a shared ideal, it subjects any party in breach to harsh judgment. As such, it is difficult to imagine a successful covenant with Leviathan. The lethal eros she embodies is self-serving and unruly, a universal solvent that defies constraint. It seeks to devour all, not commit itself to an exclusive partnership. In contrast, matrimony is the covenant par excellence, the perfect one-flesh union of 2 distinct persons by which their shared life is defined. Its demands may be extreme, the severing of natural blood ties, but it promises incomparable intimacy. This is already a far more appealing prospect than being swallowed up by Leviathan's eros. But within the biblical framework, the dignity of marriage is higher still. Marriage is an image of the proposed covenant between man and the Almighty, a covenant oriented towards the highest possible ideal. The betrothal of Noctis and Luna depicts this dynamic beautifully, given the oracle's role as divine emissary. That such a sacred union should be sundered in pursuit of a covenant with Leviathan portends catastrophe. The former promises perfect divinizing union with the ideal, the latter the ersatz godhood of universal assimilation. There is no difference between favoring the latter, favoring the possessive hunger that is Eros and the dissolution of distinction to which it inevitably leads, and seizing the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Which is, of course, exactly why Arden conspires to ensure that outcome. Arden, like Noctis, was meant to forge a marriage covenant with an oracle, a reflection of the divine. Instead, he pursues his own covenant with Leviathan by attempting to assimilate even the demonic and disintegratory, and effectively sidelines his heavenly guide in the process. In striving to manifest, through his own power, an all-encompassing ideal, Arden eats the cursed fruit. This Eros, directed as it is to an impossibility, metastasizes from universal solvent to universal toxin. It guarantees him an eternity of futile suffering and denies him all agency. It leaves him no meaning or purpose, just impotent rage against the heavens. Arden is bound not just to insatiable hunger, but to the star scourge, a seething resentment for, and drive to defile, everything that exists. And so, Arden's insistence that salvation can be obtained by willingly drinking poison consumes him, and draws Hera away from her divine calling. Ultimately, it dooms them both. Arden's union with putrefaction is consummated in Hera's blood. With that said, attempts to bind the Serpent of Desire can be just as counterproductive as Arden's reckless disregard for the consequences of overreach. Brother to the tortured idealist is the brutal pragmatist, Somnus, founder king of Lucis. Taking no chances with the Star Scourge, Somnus consigns all those suffering under its influence to the flames. His attitude is explicitly Gerardian, evoking the mythical figure of Romulus by founding a city upon the corpse of his boundary-defying brother. And in his reliance on a brazenly utilitarian moral calculus, he treats the oracle, and the divine ideal she reflects, with naught but contempt. The woman Arden loved was murdered by the man who most represents the Lucian state. To the extent that Hera remains the divine ideal, she exists only to torment him. And so, steeped in millennia-old resentment, Arden seeks to inflict upon Noctis a fate as bitter and futile as his own. He desecrates the nuptial covenant between king and oracle by murdering Noctis's own ideal. Luna's death may not be particularly graphic, but its symbolic implications are sickening. Viciously impaling a virginal bride on a serpent's altar is simultaneously a horrific parody of marital consummation and a sadistic sacrificial murder. A murder by which Arden sacrifices Noctis's connection with the divine to Leviathan, leaving him to the tender mercies of all-devouring Eros. That is the cost of the covenant as Arden sees it. Fortunately, Luna has other ideas. What Arden intends for evil, Luna turns to good. Ironically, his very attempt to consign her to death and dissolution presents an opportunity. The blood of a murdered innocent does not but whet Leviathan's endless thirst, but the blood of a martyr is a different story. The wrongful yet willing execution of an innocent resounds in the tombs of kings, and subjects the state itself to mortal judgment. Luna's sacrifice thereby breathes fire into dead Lucian tradition. Somnus maintained order over against abyssal desire through force of arms. Luna willingly pours out her lifeblood to raise a new and more vital standard, the heavenly light of agape, which can pierce even Eros's darkest abyss. Eros defies all external judgment, but it can be judged from within, and that which seeks to consume all is ever at risk of attempting to digest the indigestible. As Leviathan attempts to devour him, Noctis's lifeless body is raised by Luna's self-sacrificial blood, and consumed by its inexhaustible deluge of light. On his own, he is no match for Leviathan, only as an instrument of divine judgment, as bearer of the trident bestowed by the king of the astrals and the sacrificial love of his own betrothed ideal, can he divide the sea. In the end, Noctis's marital union with Luna and his covenant with Leviathan are consummated in the same baptismal waters. Noctis drowns both in Leviathan's Eros and Luna's self-sacrificial love. The king is conformed to his divine ideal in death, and thereby attains the means to judge Leviathan. In attempting to consume agape, Eros is consumed by it and torn asunder, spilling her own lifeblood as a baptism unto death, a purgative covenant born of abyssal desire. It should come as no surprise, then, that baptismal imagery features heavily in the denouement of the Leviathan arc. Titan, symbol of ossified order, associated with the Lucian state, whose own covenant demanded the shattering of his right arm of power, returns Leviathan to the sea, but Luna and Noctis are drenched in her waters regardless. Luna's passing is a willing immersion in the waves of death. It is in that flood that Luna passes on the ring, which seals both her marriage to Noctis and his ultimate sacrifice, the final fulfillment of his covenant with Leviathan. Luna herself is ultimately both assumed into the heavens to guide Noctis, shining a reflected light much like her namesake, and sunk beneath the waves to await his passing. Leviathan, the all-consuming abyss, having been conformed to the love she sought to devour, is thereby stretched all the way to the heavens, and Noctis is called to follow close behind, to pour out his lifeblood, to consume and be consumed by the crystalline heart of existence, to bear the judgment in divine light through which the Star Scourge must, finally, be judged. So what does this all mean, then, for our biblical covenant with Leviathan? An awful lot, it turns out. The overall framework presented by Final Fantasy XV offers a fascinating lens through which to view Christ's actions in the Gospels. First, FF15 offers a compelling interpretation of Leviathan itself. Leviathan is a confluence of Eros and Thanatos, an abyss of carnal desire that seeks to consume all and swallow up even the divine ideal. It is synonymous with the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Unrestrained, its end is dissolution and death. Second, FF15 clearly differentiates Leviathan and the Star Scourge. While both reflect the insatiable hunger by which the enemy sought to corrupt man, the Star Scourge functions like sin, while Leviathan functions more like death. Arden's covenant with the Star Scourge lost him his all-too-human ideal and doomed the world to corruption. Noctis's covenant with Leviathan, made possible through the intervention of divine self-sacrificial love, transfigures him into an incarnation of that love, and thereby serves as a necessary precondition for victory over the Star Scourge. Third, to consummate this covenant, Eros must be judged by the very agape it seeks to consume, and to become a judge in turn. Leviathan's tendency towards dissolution and death becomes the means of her conversion. The all-consuming flood drowns in the self-sacrificial love of the divine spouse, and thereby becomes a baptism into that very love. Ultimately, the covenant with Leviathan, and judgment of Eros by light, and marriage to the divine, and baptism into death are one and the same thing. And that means that Leviathan's presence in FF15 not only sheds light on mysterious biblical references to Leviathan, but other mysterious references as well, most notably the strange association between Christ on the cross and both the serpent on the staff and the serpent in the tree. If the figure of the serpent stands not for evil, but for abyssal desire, then manifesting that desire such that it can be bound to the self-sacrificial standard of the cross is just what it means to save the world from its alienation. Man, stripped of his attraction to the divine ideal and subject to endless futile desire, can only be saved if that desire is itself drawn up to, and ultimately fulfilled in, God. Noctis's sacrifice on the throne in the Citadel, a second high place, might present the most explicit demonstration of Final Fantasy XV's Christian undertones, but the insight provided by the Leviathan incident is equally vital. What Noctis is called to do in the end is what Luna does before him, willingly accept dissolution and death as a manifestation of the ideal to flood the world in the light of divine love. He must submit to being judged both by his gods and by the ghosts of his ancestors, the collective spirit of a dead tradition founded in scapegoat violence and the murder of a corrupted ideal, so that he might judge them and all else besides. And in that universal baptism of light, all creation is purged of its corruption, and the marriage of divine ideal and human king is accomplished. Everything that seems frustrating about Noctis's relationship with Luna as a love story ultimately serves a higher purpose. We're left not with a trivial human romance, but with a gorgeous mythic vision of salvation. That is a fantasy based on reality, and that is a tale worthy of the name Final Fantasy.